Hello, my name's Kieran. I'm a content manager with Footprint Digital, and today we're going to be talking about content marketing success, specifically how you can optimize your content to build trust and boost lead generation. I'll start with a little bit about me. So, as I said, my name's Kieran. I'm a content manager with Footprint Digital, and I've got over 6 years of experience across digital and print marketing. I've worked across large names in the legal sector, as well as recruitment, hospitality, entertainment, and healthcare. And I'm also a published author. I've self-published a horror novel. You can find it on Amazon if you search for me, and that's all the self-promo we'll have for now. When it comes to creating engaging copy that converts, there are two main steps that you want to be thinking about, and that is understanding your audience and crafting content that responds to your audience's needs. Ultimately, all successful content online is built on these two foundations, and we'll be going into a lot of detail of what both of these actually look like, starting with understanding your audience. Now, when it comes to building a successful marketing strategy, it should ultimately be built on the foundation of an understanding of your audience. In an ideal world, you should be able to narrow that understanding down to an audience of one. So you can really start thinking about who your ideal client is, what their age is, what their job or experience in life is, their location, so where they are either within the UK or internationally, what kind of budget they're working with, and quite importantly, their apprehensions and their anxieties. So are you speaking, for example, to a 25 to 35-year-old young professional living and working in London? Or are you speaking to an over 70s retiree couple who live in the Cotswolds and are concerned that they haven't yet put together their will? If you can dig into exactly who your content is trying to speak to, that really helps to make it as tailored as possible and ultimately as convincing as possible to drive those leads and turn them into conversions. There are a number of ways in which you can identify your customer anxieties. We use these at Footprint, a combination of these. So you have services like Answer the Public and also Asked, in which you can insert a keyword or a question, and it will return hundreds of categorized questions and terms around your original source term, which can really help to build out things like blog content, as well as FAQs on your service pages to really dig into what people might be trying to find out when they land on your site. You also have very simple, straightforward tools like Google's People Also Ask section. So I'm sure you'll be familiar. Anyone who's used Google, if you search anything really, this People Also Ask section will appear quite high on the search results. And this is generally just a list of FAQs that people are actually searching, the answers of which are sourced from some of the most engaging, authoritative pages that Google finds online. So ultimately, to appear in these, you need to make sure that you're creating content that directly speaks to your audience's pain points, anxieties, their wants, their needs, and you'll be promoted in search results and ultimately drive more leads to your site. But how do you actually begin to unpack what those pain points look like? We've done a little exercise here internally at Footprint, looking at a few different businesses and the kinds of pain points that their customers might have, that helps us to frame content in a way that responds to those and ultimately is as conversion centric as possible. So let's start here, quite far from legal for now, but we've got an example of a pet care business. So the kinds of place where customers might drop off their dogs or cats for the day, and they're expecting them to be looked after, fed, maybe even groomed, things like that, and they can then pick them up later in the afternoon. So what kind of things might customers who are engaging with this sort of business be concerned about? So the ones that we came up with internally are things like safety concerns. So is there guarantees that their pet will actually be safe and secure for the whole day? Are there measurements in place around things like particularly violent or aggressive dogs? Are those going to be excluded? How is that managed? Cost and value for money. This is quite industry agnostic, really, when it comes to pain points. This is a pain point that you'll find across most sectors of business. People are concerned about money. They're concerned about how much things are going to spend. They're concerned about additional fees, unexpected fees, and they want to know that they're going to get their money's worth. And then you've also got things like convenience of drop off and pickup. So what do the times look like for that? Is there any fees associated with late pickup? Is there leniency around those bandings? If you don't have the answers to these questions on your site, in your blogs, in your FAQs, on your service pages, and your competitors do, your customers will go to them. It sounds blunt, but that's ultimately what it's all about, is that if you're not creating content that converts, you will be losing leads that your competitors will be picking up. Let's look a little more specifically at the legal sector now. So if we conduct the same exercise for a specialist law firm, what are some of the ways, some of the pain points, the ways people are thinking that would dictate the sorts of content and responses that you'd want to have on your site? So the cost of retained services, again, cost is a really big one. Some firms we work with, they don't really want to convey that they're, cheap or budget friendly, because that's not the kind of audiences they're looking for. That's absolutely fine. It's just about making sure that you start creating content in the first place. Then things like the expertise and the success rate of the solicitors that work at your firm, things like case studies, awards that have been given, success stories, all kinds of different ways in which you can get across that you are very successful at what you do, and here's XYZ showcasing that. And finally, one of the pain points we decided upon was the timeline of the client's unique case. So if they're reaching out to you about something that's particularly time sensitive, they're really concerned, they need answers tomorrow, if not today, are they going to hear back from you in weeks, if not months? You need to make sure that if you are very prompt, first of all, that you actually are, and that you're able to get back to those queries, but that information is conveyed on your site. If you say to people, we will absolutely get back to you within 24 hours. We have an immediate 24/7 helpline for particular cases, whatever it might be, make sure that people are aware of that before they reach out to you in the first place. Another really great way of understanding your customers and where they're at is the marketing funnel. So this helps you to visualize where they are on their journey. And almost all clients, regardless of sector, will travel down this funnel when across their journey with an organization. So generally, they'll always begin at that awareness stage. That's when they're first kind of working out what it is they need. It might not even be where they're not aware of the specific service they need. They might just be aware of the problem they're in, and you need to help them understand that. As they move down, we then get to that consideration phase. This is where people are maybe looking at different suppliers of certain services. They're trying to work out the pros and cons of going with certain firms, trying to understand what really works best for them, whether that's a localization angle, again, whether that's conveying your testimonials and reviews and success stories. And then finally, after they've decided upon who it is they want to go with, we move down to the conversion stage. So this is where they're ready to convert, they're ready to reach out, they're ready to retain your services. Other industries, this could be obviously things like purchases, but you don't tend to have that as much within legal, where it's buying a one-off product. So conversion can be a very broad term that might mean many, many different things. And then finally, off the back of conversion, you've got loyalty and advocacy. So these are both similar areas that you can generally group together when it comes to measuring the success of your content marketing, through things like leaving reviews, whether that's on Google or specific niche legal review sites, and just fostering that very positive customer experience that would help to bring in new customers off the back of those positive success stories. There's another way of visualizing this journey, which is known as the loyalty loop. So very, very similar concept, really. The classic journey for customers would start at that consideration phase. They're kind of thinking about what they might need from a law firm before they start digging into the specific firms they're going to. Evaluate, very similar, where they're just comparing what's out there in the market, and then ultimately buy, or in this case, it may be, reach out, sign up for services, whatever that might look like. And then ultimately, through the success of that loop, you're trying to build the loyalty loop, which is where they enjoy, they appreciate your services, they come back to you again and again, they refer other people to your firm because of the successful experience they had in the first place. And Finally, on understanding your customers, you need to try and understand their search intent. So this comes hand in hand with your keyword research, and it's about breaking down the ways in which customers will search for things that helps you to deliver content that responds to those searches, which sounds quite complicated, but we've broken it down here into the 4 types of intent that hopefully makes that a little bit clearer. So at the top of the funnel, at the beginning of that loop, you have informational searches where your customers are trying to learn something. So that could be how to write a will. And in order to help progress them along with your firm and your website, you need to deliver the top of funnel content that really helps to answer those questions. So things like blog posts, how-to guides, video content is obviously a huge one, regardless of what sector you're in. You then have commercial searches. So that's when people are trying to compare something, which in this case is most likely the different providers of a certain legal service. So for example, best family solicitors near me, you've got that geographical angle in there. You've got bests, they're looking for a comparison. And the ways in which search engines work now, especially in the age of AI searches, Google will most likely put together a list, maybe even a comparison table outlining you against your competitors. And to appear near the top of that, you need to make sure that you're serving things like really optimized service pages, FAQs that help to outline who you are, why you're the best, what kind of things you can offer, and motivational techniques. And we'll come onto these a little bit later when I talk about value propositions, but ultimately motivational techniques are things like high quality calls to action, high quality unique selling points. So being able to really differentiate yourself beyond things like read more, contact the team, you know, those really basic kind of calls to action. You also then have transactional search intent. So this is when the customer is at the point they're ready to buy something. They're searching for things like commercial law services. They know exactly what they want to find. They're ready to make that purchase or conversion. They could be looking for a specific business, although if they're going to search a branded term, that would move into the navigational side of things. And these transactional searches are best served by things like high quality imagery, making sure that your website is very aesthetically engaging, as well as having the written content on it that would explain things for people. You have frictionless CTA, so people don't find it confusing or difficult to be able to actually reach out if they've decided you're the person that can provide a service to them. And also those client reviews, those testimonials that really help get them over the line once they're at the point they're ready to make that transaction. Finally, we have navigational search intent. So this is when people are trying to find something really specific. So it could be your firm's name, litigation practice, something like that. It's difficult to try and target these keywords because generally your authority for them is built up by really nailing the other areas of customer intent. And as a result, the best way to serve these is branded information, easy user experience, making sure that when people do find the exact page they're looking for, you know, it has the information they want. It has the kind of guide through the rest of your site if it's not quite what they're looking for. And that brings me into related pages. So if they're looking for a specific service, or they think they're trying to find a specific service, but actually, you know, from experience, you offer another service that's more closely aligned with the sort of problem challenge they might be encountering, making sure that that customer journey is as seamless as possible through incorporating those related pages. So now we move on to crafting content that responds to their needs. You've taken the time to really understand who your client is. How do you actually go about creating content that helps them to find what they're looking for, helps them to stumble across you on search results, and ultimately leads them to that conversion? I wanted to start off just by breaking down optimized content. I've used this term a little bit. You'll hear it a lot when it comes to digital marketing and SEO. What does that actually look like? What does that mean? Here's a quick little checklist that is by no means exhaustive, but is quite a good place to start when it comes to understanding what optimization actually looks like on your pages. So they have a good meta title and description, and I'll come on to what that looks like in just a moment. Your pages, your content has a user-friendly URL structure. So that might be your site's name /services/family law or even a level beyond that, slash family law, slash adoption solicitors, let's say, rather than an automatically generated kind of string of random letters and numbers that is confusing for users and also for search engines when they're trying to categorize your content. You have really clear heading tags on your site. So these are your H1s, H2s, and I'll explain a little bit about those in just a moment. You have intuitive internal linking. So as I was just speaking about with related pages, that's making sure that your site is easy to navigate and that people can find their way around to find the kind of content they're looking for as they engage with your pages. You should also have really clever use of keyword integration, so making sure that the keywords are written in a very naturalistic way while being in very priority locations like your headers and your calls to action. The page should have a suitable length. So for blogs, this is typically longer than service pages. There's not really a set number that you should be aiming for. It's ultimately as long as it needs to be to deliver upon a user's request. So if they're trying to find information through one of your blogs and you have a real slapdash 50 to 100 word blog, that's probably not going to be as useful for them as towards the 1,000 word end of things that has a lot of subsections and subheadings that break up that content. And finally, probably most importantly, completely original content. So optimized content is always completely original. Even if you have similar services across your site, you want to make sure that all of them have original content describing them. There's no copy and pasting. Duplication ultimately has a number of downsides, which can include keyword cannibalization, penalization from Google, because they will lower your pages in search rankings if it's identified that you're just kind of copy and pasting and it has a bad user experience. And ultimately, you might be removed from search results if you don't address this as soon as possible. So this is particularly relevant in the age of AI, again, where people are using AI content to just write a lot of their site. It's often not the great way to go when it comes to content creation, because a lot of that will be taken from other places on the internet and ultimately just not read very well for humans. So next, we will move on to meta titles and descriptions, one of those key optimization factors I mentioned. Just a quick overview of what good meta titles and descriptions look like. So as you'll see from this table, both titles and descriptions have minimum and maximum lengths that you should aim for. If you go beyond these, your content will be cut off on search engines. So particularly when it comes to titles, you want to always make sure that you have primary keywords as close to the start as possible, so that even if things are cut off on search engines, people can still see, the most important part of your title. But generally keep it as concise as possible. And then when it comes to descriptions, you want to include things like keywords, unique selling points, features and benefits, ideally a call to action, which we generally, that grouping of things is known as a value proposition. You can adapt your meta descriptions from your page content. If there's a particularly grabbing introductory sentence you have describing your service, then you can use that for the meta description. But just to note that Google often won't use your meta descriptions, which might sound odd considering the emphasis we've put on this. But I think it's in every roughly 75% of searches, Google will generate its own meta descriptions for your pages. And that's based on things like what the users might have searched for in the first place to try and match them as clearly as they can. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and create great meta descriptions still, because in the quarter of instances where your version does appear to users, you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. We'll talk now about headings, just a quick overview of heading structure. If you haven't kind of dug into uploading pages, this might not be familiar to you, the tags, the H1s, H2s, but they're just really important to not only visually differentiate content on your page, but when it comes to SEO spiders crawling your site, it helps them to understand the formation of your page and the prioritization of information. So obviously your H1 and H2s are kind of really key important sections, and as you go down it's kind of diminishing importance, often just more for aesthetic reasons. So this continues into H5, H6s. Once you get to that point, it's more about just breaking up content visually for the reader, but that is just as important. Ultimately we are writing content for readers, not search engines. So just a quick overview. Your H1, your page title, should often have high priority keywords, typically reflect your URL and your meta title. H2 are your section headings, which will guide the reader through the page. So this might be, for example, you might have a H2 of our legal or our family law services, and then your H3s will be the subheadings within that section. So underneath that, you might have things like adoption solicitors, child custody solicitors, things like that. And then, as I said, H4, H5, H6 are technically of diminishing importance when it comes to technical SEO. But from a reader's point of view, they're really key for visually breaking up that page and making it as intuitive as possible. All of this kind of comes together to create value propositions. So these are the ways in which you structure the information on your pages and write about yourself to really set yourself apart from your competitors and put your best foot forward when it comes to content that converts. So a value proposition typically compiles 3 key copywriting elements that we use to help aid conversion. Those are high value calls to action, CTAs, high value unique selling points, your USPs, and motivational factors. Ideally, value propositions should be everywhere on your landing pages, as well as things like your meta descriptions that users will see on search engines. And we've got an example here on the right-hand side of what high value versus low value can look like for these things. So the high value CTA might be something like protect your family's legacy. If you had a page about writing a will, for example, and you had will writing services. On the lower value side of things, your CTAs would just be read more, see more, get in touch, meet the team, browse articles, those very basic kind of guidance markers that you come across on websites. Your unique selling points, true USPs are quite unique, ironically, yeah, so there'll be things like you're voted #1 by whatever the governing body might be in 2024. 97% of customers recommend you. Truly unique elements that really set you apart within the market, as opposed to things like one of the leading. Clients choose us because. These are useful if you don't have those statistics that can really elevate you into a unique position within your industry. But overuse of these makes you feel a little bit generic and makes it tricky to really stand out in the marketplace. And finally, motivational factors. These are the things that really help to aid those CTAs, USPs. They really drive confidence in you as a firm. So Trustpilot ratings, or as I said, kind of more niche legal review aggregates, highlighting your exceptional team members. If you have particular team members that are thought leaders that have been at industry events or have been particularly notable within the industry, making sure that you really project them and make that very clear for readers when they come to your page. Having data-led case studies that really back up the idea that you are trustworthy and people should use you. Incorporating those sorts of things into your content is really, really important for driving conversion across the board. As a bit of a summary of that whole section, I just wanted to dive into what a perfect page looks like. So on the SEO side of things, you're looking at things like optimized page titles and meta descriptions and headers. Optimizing meaning all those things we spoke about. So keyword insertion, making sure it's as unique as it can be. It's not copied from other sections of your site. And also then naturally including keywords. So it doesn't feel like you're writing for robots, but you're still including those terms that mean that search engines will return your pages if people are searching for particular services. We've then got the juicy bit of what a perfect page looks like. So value propositions, particularly in the intro at the top of your page before people start scrolling. You're answering queries, you're alleviating those customer anxieties, you're speaking to those pain points. You're tailoring your content to the right search intent. So whether that's a service page, whether that's a blog, whether that's even your homepage, you know, making sure you know the reasons why people might be landing on that page and the content is crafted in a way that responds to that. You're keeping your audience always front of mind. You're making sure that you're crafting content directly to their wants and needs, and you're incorporating those high value calls to action and unique selling points. Usability. So this is all about making sure you have small paragraphs to break up your content. You don't just have a block of text that is intimidating to people and they'll just jump off your page as soon as they land. You want to use the inverted pyramid structure. So this is important for things like blog posts. You want to include the most important information first and ultimately the kind of supplementary info as you go down. Use things like bullet points and numbered lists, formatting tools where possible to help break up that content and just make it a little bit more visually engaging. And we say don't we all over your content. So many websites we come across are guilty of this, where they'll say, we offer this, our team does this, and you don't really frame it in a very active way that is catered towards your audience, talking about the benefits and what they can get out of your content. If you we all over your website, people will switch off and they will go elsewhere. That's ultimately what this all boils down to. And finally, just a few other little bits. So break up your content with imagery where you can. Include useful anchor links. So this is where you're linking on your site to other areas in an intuitive way. So not necessarily saying, we've written this blog, read it here, but you're linking specifically when you mention the blog title, for instance. Think about alt tags. So when you're uploading imagery, they should all have alt tags so that screen readers can read that content. It's really important from an accessibility point of view, but also for SEO and the performance of your website. And always have an actionable CTA on your page. Even if you have an informational blog, there should be a CTA of some sort so that people can either reach out to your team, they can read related content, whatever it might be. You want to keep people engaged and drive them to convert from a lead into a paying client for you and your organization. I wanted to finish just on a few common content mistakes. So these are the things that we see across many websites that we've worked on and used for research purposes across the internet. These are just things you should bear in mind when you're creating your content to make sure that you're converting and you're not actually driving away customers when they land on your site. So first and foremost, common content mistake number one is making it boring. This is in instances where people don't really believe in themselves. They might say they're one of, in this example, South London's window experts, rather than saying you're the go-to expert. And there's a few ways in which you can avoid making your content boring. First and foremost is keeping copy short. We've got an example, or a statistic rather, that is when average sentence length is 14 words, readers understand 90% of what they're reading. At 43 words, however, that drops to less than 10%. And I think in professional industries like the legal sector, it's very easy to write lengthy sentences that are very complex because of the nature of what you're writing about. But wherever possible, you need to try and keep it as short as you can to make sure that people are actually internalizing what you're trying to tell them and they don't just switch off. Some other solutions are using metaphors to create images, particularly if you're writing blogs, and writing with conviction. So as we had on the example on the right-hand side here, believe in yourself and your services, because if you don't, why should your customers? The second common content mistake is writing for robots. So some people, when they begin writing SEO content, they immediately start thinking, well, how does this work for search engines? You know, is this page good for search engines? While that should be a consideration of yours, your main goal should be to write to your human audience. And some of the best ways you can go about that is shortening and exaggerating. So making it engaging for a human as opposed to a bot that is maybe crawling the site. Using repetition for impact. This is perhaps more on the paid ads side of things, where you need a real snappy bit of copy to draw people in, and using inversion to stand out. So on the example we've got on the right-hand side here, you've got clunky, expensive, archaic. These aren't words you want to describe your design software. Try the world's most intuitive editing suite built for the 21st century. If you imagine this ad positioned alongside lots of other ads saying sleek, innovative, AI enabled, you know, they'll all generally say the same thing. If you can find a way to stand out, that will really help. It's slightly more difficult when you're dealing with the professional industries like the legal sector, but just something to bear in mind. If there's a way in which you can really help to differentiate your firm from all the others that are saying essentially the exact same thing. The third common content mistake is losing all personality. So you see this a lot in the B2B sector. Businesses essentially just become a faceless mass that has no real sense of color or personality. Some very quick and easy ways to fix this is using humans in your content. So rather than writing everything from the faceless voice of your organization, having your experts at the forefront of your blogs or of your service pages, even making sure that people can relate to the actual people that they will be working with. Identify your brand voice early. So whenever we work with clients for the first time, we really take the time to dig into what their brand voice looks like and make sure that that's consistent across all the content on their site. And then finally, sell against an enemy. So this is quite a specific example. We've worked before with a infrared heating organization, and they helped us to understand how they wanted to sell against the convection heater market. So it sounds very niche, but it helped us to really position them as different to convection heaters and highlight all the benefits of going down the infrared route instead. And the final content mistake that we come across is that businesses forget what makes you, you. So they kind of adopt a very generic tone of voice that doesn't really differentiate them within the market. And ultimately then users will just look elsewhere if they find the content dull or uninteresting. So quick and easy solutions to this: shout about your USPs. What can you talk about that nobody else can that helps to set you apart? Sell your outcomes, not your features. Obviously, a lot of people offering legal services will have very, very similar services. If you can talk about the outcomes you specifically can achieve that your competitors can't, that immediately helps to set you apart and just give you something interesting that people can hook into. And finally, not so much applicable necessarily within a lot of legal offerings, but polarized to inspire passion. So we got the example on the right here, of course, of Marmite. You love it or hate it. I didn't even really need to include the image of Marmite there, and you'd know exactly what I was talking about. If there is some way in which you can capture that sort of brand recognition, that's gold dust, really. Like, there's not much that your competitors could do to beat you when it comes to that. And obviously that's something that you build up over time, but it's, again, just something to be mindful of when you're creating content that's trying to convert as opposed to drive users away. But all of this is well and good. You know, we've spoken about what some of the best practices that you should incorporate, but does any of this actually work, or are we just kind of you know, speaking from a place of inexperience? Well, I thought I'd include, just to round out, a couple of key success stories of our own, just to highlight that actually this approach to content is very successful when it's you know, properly incorporated into your strategy. So the first example here we worked with a children's party entertainment provider, and ultimately their goal, they came to us, was to improve the brand awareness. So at the beginning of that kind of marketing funnel, the loyalty loop, it was trying to target those users who are conducting informational searches to try and find things out. And although here we're talking about an entertainment provider, this could be just as applicable to any law firm. You know, you still have customers at the beginning of that journey. How do you create content that answers their needs and draws them in to be a long-term client of yours? So our strategy for approaching this goal was to create a top-of-funnel informational help hub that was driven by blog content that was very SEO optimized. It was targeting keywords and search terms that we identified users were actually using, and then providing answers to those questions. The result of this was that we saw over 1,000 total keyword ranking improvements upon the launch of this help hub. And this is something that we're continuing to evolve on. So that's another thing to bear in mind, is that SEO doesn't exist within a vacuum. This needs to be something that you kind of work on and iterate on and learn from results and develop off the back of them. And the final case study we've got here is, again, I mentioned that infrared supplier that we'd worked with, and their goal was to bring in more leads. So the strategy that we conducted for this was joint between our paid media team and the content team in which I reside. And it was about looking at their pages, identifying what maybe the competitors were doing better, identifying the keywords that they were targeting, and seeing how we could tweak those pages to offer more value and ultimately drive conversions. The result off the back of this was pretty significant. I think this was within the space of a couple of weeks, maybe on a month. We saw a 600% increase in phone calls to our client and a 760% increase in views on specific product pages that they'd asked us to look at. So not only did we didn't do a kind of one size fits all approach to the entire website. We looked at specific pages they had where they had very niche products they were trying to bring to the forefront, and we looked at the ways in which we could optimize those through both those keyword searches and keyword targeting, but also trying to identify the things that people will want to know about those products. And again, even though this is an infrared heating supplier, these learnings can be taken and adapted into the legal sector, into any sector, because ultimately it's all about identifying what your users are looking for and delivering upon that. So, spoken quite a lot. That is everything from me for now. Get out there and start creating great content. And if you have any questions at all, get in touch with either myself or Footprint Digital, and we'd be happy to help out.